the Richard Dawkins of the world, the Sam Harris of the world, the Christopher Hitchens of the world, and say, hold on a second. We have a tradition that is very strong. Not only does it revive people's hearts, but it elevates the intellect of man, and it shows very good reasons that the divine exists. And this is what I want to hopefully show you today, so we could have a conversation today, so we could address strong arguments for the existence of Allah, and respond to atheist contentions, respond to the question that the atheists may pose to the Muslim. Now, before I get into the arguments, I want to discuss something important, something which really talks about our own very existence as human beings. Because we have to realize, brothers and sisters, atheism, in my humble opinion, has nothing to do with science or philosophy. It's to do with psychology. Because in the Quran, if you think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rarely mentions the point of atheism. Rather, always talks about Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the power of Allah, the oneness with regards to His names and attributes, the oneness with regards to His rububiyyah, His lordship, uluhiyyah, oneness with regards to singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in worship, and singling Him out with regards to seeking help and aid. This is the Quran. It's full of Tawheed, full of the oneness of Allah. And in some places, it mentions and makes us reflect upon the reality of the universe. Can it come from nothing? Can we exist just out of nothing? Can we come into being out of nothing? And the reason I think this is the case is because atheism is an issue of the heart. And I want to start something that really relates with regards to the issue of the heart. And I want you to listen very carefully. And think about your own very existence when I talk to you about this. Now, brothers and sisters, without Allah, is there any true value in life? Ultimate value. I'm not talking about subjective value, a value that we attribute to our own selves. I'm a nice guy. I want to be an engineer. But I'm talking about the ultimate value for our life. In absence of the divine, in absence of God, in absence of Allah, is the ultimate value. Because think about this. You could spend your whole life trying to be a doctor, or your whole life trying to find the cure to cancer. You could spend your whole life trying to seek justice and peace in the world, and be a politician that does achieve global peace. If our lives just end in the grave, we become worm buffet, does it really matter if we existed at all? Think about this. If there is no akhirah, if there is no divine, if there are none of these concepts, does it really matter even if we existed? If I lived my life as a devil, and you lived your life as an angel, who cares if there's no divine? Who cares if there's no divine accountability? Similarly, without the divine, brothers and sisters, is there any ultimate meaning? Any ultimate purpose? Now you may say, the meaning of my life is I want to become a doctor. The meaning of my life, I want to become an engineer. But this is self-delusion. You're playing with your own life. Because you're saying, I'm attributing meaning and purpose for my own existence, but the underlying meaning and the underlying purpose, the ultimate purpose for your very being, for your very existence, is non-existent. It is based on a random process, chance. We are a miscarriage of nature. We are the cosmic orphan. Because a human being is left to ask the question, why? We're different from animals because they're driven by their instincts to live their life. However, the human being is a cosmic orphan. This is why the American writer once wrote, being born, the very act of your birth is like being kidnapped and sold into slavery. Because you didn't choose your parents. You chose your parents. Did you choose you being Pakistani? No. Or Bengali or Somali. Did you choose your DNA? Did you choose the very birthplace of your birth? Did you choose the country that you're going to be born into? You didn't choose none of these things, people. You didn't even choose your social biological context. And we say we're free? We're enslaved to these things. So how do we achieve true freedom? Well, we have to understand our context. Are we going to be a slave to social biological processes? Are we going to be a slave to ourselves? Or are we going to be a slave to Allah? Because enslaving ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only thing that will give you true freedom. You may think, I'm free. I can choose to do what I want to do. But having choice doesn't necessitate you are actually free. Because you could be enslaved by your choices. Because your choices are driven by what? Social biological circumstance and your own desires. So you're always enslaved to something, people. So what gives you the true freedom? The true freedom is by enslaving yourself from Allah. Ubudiyah, having a servanthood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that removes the shackles from the social biological slavery, from the slavery of context, from the slavery of the system of the world, from the slavery of our own desires. So this is a preamble to our discussion. The topic of atheism is very important because it's about your own existence, your own life. Are you going to be a slave to society? Are you going to be a slave to social biological context? Or are you going to be a slave to yourself? Or are you going to enslave yourself to Allah and free you from these things? Are you going to have ultimate meaning for your life? Are you going to have ultimate value? This is the emotional preamble, the emotional context to our discussion. Because it's important. Because think about it this way. From an atheist worldview, if we are just molecules, we're just matter, then I ask you the question, does it really matter? Think about it. Why do we attribute values to these things? A bombing somewhere of innocent human beings, from an atheist perspective, is not killing of innocents. It's just a rearrangement of molecules. Think about it. Because if you're just carbon and rearrangement of molecules, then we're just a rearrangement of matter, of energy. So this leads nicely for us now to enter into a very rational discussion upon the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we've dealt with the emotional existential context, which basically means, what does it mean to exist? Without Allah, we don't really have any meaning or value. So brothers and sisters, listen very carefully to some of the arguments I'm going to use to give a good case for the existence of Allah. And these arguments belong to the Quran. Now we have to be very careful when we argue, or when we discuss, or we have a conversation with someone, that we do not use a basis for our discussion or a premise for our discussion that doesn't belong in the Quran and the Sunnah. This is very important because sometimes we could enter into blameworthy kalam. Now blameworthy kalam is not talking and being philosophical, that's fine. It is using your basis for your discussion and it not being related to the Quran and Sunnah. It's very important. So in order for us to have a safe discussion, we must first start with the principles based upon the Quran and Sunnah. Now it doesn't mean you have to mention what the Quran says necessarily, but as long as those ideas exist within our tradition, it's very important, brothers and sisters. So let's take the first argument. The first argument I call is that Allah makes sense of the beginning of the universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes sense of the beginning of the universe. Now we know, according to the Quran and the Sunnah, that we don't believe in the eternality of the universe. We don't believe the universe is eternal. Okay? This was one of the responses of the atheists. Like a famous atheist called Bertrand Russell, he made the claim and said, you know what? The universe is a brute fact. It's just there, has no beginning, no end, it's eternal. The type of Aristotelian view that unfortunately some of the Muslims adopted in the age where we didn't really understand what the Quran and Sunnah was talking about. This is why the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah came along and actually dealt with these arguments. So the Quran says, no, the universe had a point and had a beginning in time. Now this is exactly what the scientists say, because they talk about the Big Bang. Has everyone heard of the Big Bang? Now, the Big Bang, according to cosmologists, is that space, matter and energy and time were all created at an event called the singularity. Okay? Called the singularity. And the whole of space-time was actually created. The whole of space-time was actually created. And there are various models of the Big Bang, but each variation of the model necessitates a beginning in time. This is almost a consensus, an ijma' amongst the cosmologists, amongst the scientists. This is why Alexander Vilenkin, he's one of, if not the best, theoretical cosmologist on the planet. Alexander Vilenkin, he says, look, this is proof now. The cosmologists cannot run away from the fact that the universe began to exist. The universe had a beginning in time. And we also know that the universe must begin to exist, that the universe had a starting point, because if the universe never had a starting point, it would mean that the past of the universe is infinite. If the universe never began, it means the history of the universe is infinite. But I ask you the question, brothers and sisters, can the infinite exist in the material world? Can we have the infinity in the material world? Well, let me give you an example. Say I wanted to give a big hug to Sheikh Yusha Evans, yeah? I want to give him a hug, right? I can't give him a hug until you, brother, give me permission. But you can't give me permission until the brother next to you gives you permission. And if that goes on forever, am I ever going to give the Sheikh a hug? Unfortunately for him, no. Yeah? I won't be able to give him a hug. And that's the reality of the infinite. It doesn't exist in the real world. It would lead to contradictions. And this, if we apply it to the history of the universe, it can't be infinite, people. So from these two perspectives, philosophical if you like, and scientific, the universe began to exist. It's well known. Sometimes you don't even have to discuss this, brothers and sisters. Now, if the universe began to exist, think about the possibilities. And these possibilities are the possibilities the Quran gives us. The Quran talks about the human creation, but if you look at the tafsir, the exegesis, the explanation for these verses, you can apply it to any type of creation, including the whole universe. Now think about this. If the universe began, then it was either created from nothing, it created itself, or it was created. Now let's work together with these brothers and sisters. This is all you need to know. If the universe began, and we know the universe began to exist, it either came from nothing, it created itself, or it was created. Now let's have this discussion. Number one, could the universe come from nothing? But out of nothing, nothing comes. This is an undeniable principle, brothers and sisters. It's an undeniable principle. For example, if I said to you, on my left appeared a grey rhino, would I claim that it came out from nothing? Would you agree with me that it could just pop into existence out of nothing? Or if on my right I had an Eskimo, and he popped into existence out of nothing, would you agree with such a concept? If you heard a noise, would you say that noise just appeared from nowhere? Would you? This is an undeniable principle. Out of nothing, nothing comes. This is why even non-Muslim thinkers agree with this. Like P.J. Swart, in his publication About Time, he says if there's anything we can find inconceivable, is that something could arise from nothing. Now the second option is the universe created itself. Now why would we think this is crazy? Why would we think self-creation is crazy? Well, listen to these few points. Firstly, for something to self-create, it means it was in existence and not in existence at the same time. Now, can something exist and not exist at the same time? Now, if you don't understand this, let me give you a nice example. And I ask you a question. Can your mother give birth to herself? That's what we're saying. For the universe to create itself, it's like saying your mother gave birth to herself. Or you gave birth to your own self. Is that a possibility, brothers and sisters? Exactly, no. So we know self-creation is an impossibility. So what's the final option? The final option is that the universe has a creator or a cause. And we know this creator must be all-powerful because it created the whole universe. We know this creator must be intelligent because it created the laws of the universe. And a lawgiver indicates that it's intelligent. We know this creator or cause must be uncaused. Why are we saying this? Because some people say, well, who created the creator then? Well, we could answer this by saying, if we do this all the time, then we'll never have creation. Now, work with me here. If we say who created the creator, what stops us from saying who created that creator, that created the creator, that created the creator? Sorry. And then what stops us from saying who created that creator, that created that creator, that created that creator, that created that creator, that created creation? But then what stops us from saying, well, who created that creator, that 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 created creation? If I do this forever, would we ever have creation? Would we ever have creation? No. Just like the example I gave you by hugging the sheikh. I would never hug the sheikh if I had to ask permission from someone and that permission had to go on forever. Similarly, with creation and the creator, it just wouldn't make sense if we have a forever chain of creators. It just wouldn't make sense. So necessarily, he has to be uncreated. So what we've done here, brothers and sisters, just using our aql, we've come to agree with what the Quran said 1400 years ago. We know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the 112th chapter, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Say, Allah is one, the uniquely one, ahad, uniquely one. He's the eternal, the absolute. He begets not, nor was he begotten, and there is nothing like unto him. So look what we've done, just by analyzing the universe that it began to exist. We know it couldn't come out of nothing. We know it can't self-create. Therefore it must have a creator. Very simple argument. And wallahi, brothers and sisters, you pose this to an atheist, and the majority of them won't have a way out. It's a simple argument based upon the logic of the Quran. Universe began to exist. It either came from nothing, it created itself, or it had a creator. Absolutely simple. If there are other options, then entertain the options, but there are no other options. So our explanation is the best explanation. Look how simple that is. And you guys could go out into your community and actually discuss this with an atheist. Say, look, we know that the universe began to exist. It's not eternal. If that is the case, it either came from nothing, it created itself, or it has a creator. Isn't this simple in essence, brothers and sisters? So, that's the first argument. Now we have another argument, which is like the design of the universe. Let me give you the simple form. Now, I would like you to imagine something. Come with a journey to me. Say we're on a camel, okay? We're riding on a camel, and we're riding in the vastness of the Sahara Desert. And in the Sahara Desert, we see this. A BlackBerry. Or if you like, an iPhone. Yeah? We see an iPhone, a BlackBerry in the middle of the desert, and we scratch our heads and we raise the question, how did it come to be? Now there are some possibilities. The first possibility, it came there by chance. Somehow in the desert the oil came up and it created plastic to form the casing. And the sand melted away to form the glass and the silicon. And somehow, via these random processes, you found your own mobile phone number on the phone, in the phone. That's the first option. The second option, it was put there, or it was designed to be put there. Now what's the best explanation? That it came via a random process, via chance, which is a high improbability, or it was put there by design? Well, we know the best explanation is design, because the chance hypothesis is not a rational hypothesis. Do you know why? Because these probabilities are so improbable. To use them as an explanation would mean you can't have a conversation anymore. You could say to an atheist, you know what, Mr. Atheist? I don't believe my mother's my mother anymore. I believe that she's a pink elephant and she was born on Pluto and she flew here on a Mustang. Now he may say to me, Mr. Tzortsis, you're crazy. And I may reply, but there's a chance. That's how silly chance is. These type of improbabilities are so mind-reeling, So crazy that to use them as a justification for anything just means you can't have a conversation anymore. So the best explanation is design. So if we expand this example of the desert and the mobile phone to the whole universe itself, which is far more complex than a mobile phone, then we have the only one explanation, which is design. Now an atheist's response to this, and you can find this in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, on page 157, 158. He says, you know what? Design is a strong argument, but he said, I have a problem. Well, who designed the designer? Now think about it. He said, who designed the designer? And we could respond to this in two ways. The first way is, even in science, the best explanation doesn't require an explanation. Think about this. If we went onto the moon, and we were digging away, and we found a BlackBerry, some parts of the camera, the microphone, photographs, pottery, arrowheads. What would be the best explanation? The best explanation would be is that there was some kind of civilization. Now if someone comes along and says, you can't claim such a thing, we don't know what their names are, we don't know where they came from, does that mean our explanation is not the best explanation anymore? Of course it does. But also, if you say who designed the designer, then we could say the same thing. Well, who designed that designer that designed the designer? Then we could say exactly the same thing. Who designed that designer that designed the 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 universe? If we do this forever, are we ever going to have design, the universe itself? No. So to claim who designed the designer is equivalent of saying that there is no universe. So there must be an undesigned designer. So that's the second argument, brothers and sisters. So there's two arguments we've posed here. The first argument is that Allah makes sense of the beginning of the universe. The second argument we've posed is that Allah makes sense of the design of the universe. And we give a very simple example with the mobile phone. Now, I want to give you another argument, which is the Quran itself. Because I believe the Quran is a proof for the existence of Allah. Because if you could prove this book is from the divine, or you can't find any natural reason for this book, you can't explain it naturally, you can't explain it came from a man, you can't explain it came from anything intelligent within the material world, then the best explanation is it came from the supernatural. The best explanation is that it came from the divine. Now let me explain this for you. We know the Quran is an intrusive book. It's a very special book, brothers and sisters. Because the Quran is the only religious book that seeks to engage with your aql, with your intellect. It seeks to engage with your nafsiyah, with your disposition, with your psychology, with your heart, with your soul, with your fitrah, with your natural state. And the Quran does this in a forceful way. But this forcefulness is not negative. It's very positive. Because it does this and it achieves this by answering profound questions. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And within themselves, do they not see? أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. Do they not reflect within themselves? أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Have you not seen the camel and how it was created? وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. And thus to explain our signs and evidences in detail for those who reflect. يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Coming from the Arabic triliteral stem, the root of Arabic, فَكَرَى, which we know according to the classical dictionaries has a meaning of the thing that you're reflecting upon. Don't do it in a shallow way. The thing that you're reflecting upon, be deep. Understand the implication of what this thing is. What does it mean? So the Quran calls for deep thinking. So we see the Quran is a book for a thinking human being. It encourages thinking. It really plays with our mind with good questions about man, life and the universe. And it also gives us things to think about our own self, reflecting within ourselves. Now you may think, wow, amazing book. An atheist might say, that's a very interesting book. It makes you think. It asks questions. It doesn't say believe just because I said so. It's not based on blind faith. But the Quran goes even further than this, brothers and sisters. It goes even further than this. As the Quran says in Surah Baqarah verse 23, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you are in doubt, look, the Quran is talking to the doubters, the skeptics, the atheists, the humanists, the philosophers, the scientists, the thinkers. Everybody. If you're in doubt about this book that we have revealed to our servant, referring to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then bring one chapter like it. One chapter. And call on your witnesses and your supporters besides Allah, if you are truthful. In kuntum sadiqeen. If you are truthful in your claim. And we know the original background to this verse, the explanation, according to the Mufassirun, like we have chains of narration related to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, Qurtubi, Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Kathir, Tafsir al-Jalalain. We have an ijma'a of the ulama that this verse has something to do with the language of the Quran, the uniqueness, the brilliance, the eloquence, the peak of eloquence, the sea of rhetoric of the Quran itself. Because we know 1400 years ago, when the Quran was revealed, it was revealed upon a people who were the best at expressing themselves in the Arabic tongue. This is why the Orientalists, those people who studied Islam and the Oriental sciences, claimed that the people 1400 years ago were Arabic linguists par excellence, which basically means they were the best. This is why the historian Ibn Rashid, he writes that the socialization of society was built so much that they would celebrate on two things: the birth of a boy and when a poet rose amongst them. A poet rose amongst them. And the Quran came down to challenge them and said, if you don't think it's from the divine, then bring something like the Quran. And they all failed. This is why Walid ibn al-Mughira, the most famous poet of the time, claimed and exclaimed, by Allah, this is not from a human being. This is what he said. Even swore by Allah. And the reason we know the Quran is truly something that cannot be matched. In technical language, it means inimitable. You cannot imitate its language. You cannot imitate its form. The reason for this is because the Quran has a unique form. It's not like Shakespeare. Who's heard of Shakespeare? Put your hand up. Okay, also known as Sheikh Zabur. Yeah? So Sheikh Zabur, for example, you may like some of his stuff based on subjective experience. For example, O Romeo, wherefore art thou, O Romeo, deny thy father and deny thy name? In Romeo and Juliet. Or you can make it more Islamic. O Abdullah, deny thy mother, deny thy tribe. Yeah? The point I'm trying to say is that it's not based on how we appreciate the language. The Quran is an eloquent book. It is a peak of eloquence. But it's also unique in the mechanics of the language, the form of the language. This is why the Orientalist A.J. Arbery, he said the Quran is a unique fusion of poetry and prose. Because the Quran cannot be described as poetry, because it doesn't conform to any of the Arabic rhythmical patterns called al-bihar. We also know it cannot be prose, because it's not straightforward speech, and it's not rhyme prose. Rather, it's Quran. This is why David J. Stewart, which is the only Orientalist of our modern times discussing the unique form of the Quran, says the Quran is none of these things, it's unique. This is why it hasn't been matched. Now you may think, I have to know Arabic to appreciate this. I have to know Arabic to know that the Quran is a linguistic miracle. No, you don't. And I want you to take this journey with me. I want you guys to put your hand up if you believe that Greece as a country exists. We all believe that Greece exists. I ask you a question. How do you know? Who's been to Greece before? Oh my God, none of you have been to Greece before? But you believe Greece exists? Now you may say, but I've seen it on a map, Hamza. Okay, so if I took this book and imagine it's a map, and I drew a map, and in the Pacific Ocean, I put a triangle. And on that triangle I said, this is the island and it's called Fufula. And I'm from the island, I'm a Fufulonian. Would you believe me? Now, have you spoken to a Greek person before? In Greece? No. So how do you know, brothers? You have yaqeen. You have certainty that Greece does exist. How do you know? Videos. So if I made a video of the Fufulonians, yeah, would you believe me? Just because you saw a video? Maybe it's a mass conspiracy, akhi. On YouTube. Even on YouTube, if we did a video on YouTube saying, for example, I'm Chinese. 你很漂亮我喜欢英国茶我们出去当了 Would you believe me? And I'm Chinese? Just because I make that claim? So what? So why? Why on earth do you believe that Greece exists? Social studies? According to social studies, I'm a terrorist, man. You're going to believe I'm a terrorist? So why do we believe Greece exists? Sorry? You're close. The uncle was talking about the certain knowledge. But how do we know? Yes. MashaAllah, takbir. You are Sheikh? MashaAllah. Very, very good. The uncle was saying is tawatur, which basically means it's the science of mutawatir reporting, which is recurrent reporting. It's basically testimony. It's been testified by so many different people at different times and places that never met each other. To claim Greece doesn't exist would be claiming a mass conspiracy. This is why, for example, C.A. Cody in his book Testimony, he raises this issue and says, we don't even truly know that the world is round. But we know we'll be mad if we claim it's flat. Because you've never felt the world before, have you? Or you've seen it on a map, but that's secondary sources. How do you know it's not like a fake globe? Do you see? You may see the mathematics, but you may not even understand it. We agree with it because it's tawatur, it's recurrent reporting, it's mass testimony. Now, what I'm going to do now, brothers and sisters, is for you to reject the Quran will be equivalent of rejecting that Greece exists. Because the Quran is also based upon tawatur. The Quran is also based on mutawatir reporting. And what is the testimony of Muslim and non-Muslim scholars regarding the Quran? Basically, it's about that the Quran has never been successfully challenged. The Quran has never been successfully challenged, as Arbuthnot, Fitzgerald Arbuthnot, the Orientalist and British translator, he said, although several attempts have been made to challenge the Quran, none have yet succeeded. And we know many, even non-Muslims agree with this. For example, Bruce Lawrence, Professor Bruce Lawrence from Duke University, in his book, The Quran, a Biography, on page number 8, he says the Quran, as tangible signs, are expressive of an inexhaustible truth. They signify meaning, layered within meaning, light upon light, miracle after miracle. From the Netherlands, he said the Quran is the most eminent written manifestation of the Arabic language. Reverend R. Bosworth Smith in his book Muhammad and Mohammedanism said, the Quran is a miracle of purity of style, of wisdom and of truth. It is one miracle claimed by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and a miracle indeed it is. So there's testimony here. Testimony from the Muslim sources as well. There's the ijma' on this issue. So from this testimony, how do you know it's from the divine? So let's recap again. The tawatur, the mutawatir report, the mass testimony is no one has been able to challenge the Quran. So let's logically find out who it could be from. We have a few options. Let's start with the first option. Can it come from an Arab? Could the Quran come from an Arab? How? The best Arabs of the time couldn't challenge the Quran. So how could it come from an Arab? We even said Walid ibn al-Mughira, the best poet of the time, couldn't challenge the Quran. So how can it come from an Arab? Now you may say it could come from today's Arab. This is impossible because today's modern Arabic has suffered linguistic degeneration. It's been degenerated. Let me give you an example. How do you say phone in Arabic? Telephone. How do you say television? Television. Yeah, it's all been like manipulated. I know you say hatif, but in other Arab countries it's been like this linguistic degeneration. So how could it be from these people that don't have the pure fusha, the pure classical Arabic embedded within their bones? Let's go to the next option. Can it be a non-Arab? No, because you have to know Arabic to challenge the Quran. So the other option is, could it have come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No, we know it could have come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because he was not known to engage in the art of eloquence and rhetoric in the fairs that they used to have to challenge the poets. He didn't acquire linguistic and literary skill. We also know that he was an Arab too, and if all Arabs failed, then it follows that he also could not produce the Quran. Also, we know that psychologically it couldn't have come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I studied psychology at university, and I did a module on psycholinguistics, a part of the course called psycholinguistics. And that means that some of the character of the author is in the text. Some of the character of the author is in the text. You know it's from Shakespeare? There's a little bit of Shakespeare in the character, right? You know it's Homer, the Greek author? Because some of Homer is in the writings. Even your own writings. You know, your teacher always knows it's from Muhammad. Fatima wrote this. Yeah? It's the same kind of style. Now, concerning the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had a 23-year period of emotional roller coaster, if you like. He was boycotted from his beloved city. He was tortured. He was stoned in Taif. His beloved Khadija passed away. Radiallahu anha. His children passed away. He fought. He was so brave sometimes on his own in the Battle of Hunayn. In the Battle of Hunayn, he was on his own for a while. So brave, saying, I am not a lie, I am the messenger of Allah. He had all this emotional roller coaster, but none of these emotions are in the Quran. The Quran, from a psycholinguistic perspective, remains in the divine voice. It's in the divine voice, people. And this is an impossibility. How can a man who achieved so much and went through so much in 23 years not have any of these emotions reflecting in the Quran itself? But it remains in the divine voice, in the divine character. Also, we know it can't come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because the hadith, the prophetic traditions of the Prophet are in distinct style from the Quran itself. How could someone maintain this instantaneously over 23 years? Two different styles, distinct. Also, and this is more fundamental, we know the Quran could not have come from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It came from the divine, because every human expression, whether it's a book, a style of writing, or even a picture, if we have the blueprint, we can always emulate it. We can always imitate it. We can always copy it. This is why you hear on the news sometimes a very famous Dutch artist, his work was, for example, replicated and it was sold for millions of dollars. The replica. And the reason it's so good is because the blueprint, the original, is alive today. You know where the brush strokes are. You know what texture they used. You know what color they used. You know the style of painting they had. Was it post-impressionism, impressionism, or whatever the case may be? The point is, if you have any human expression, you can copy it if you have the blueprint. But we have the Quran today. We could open the book, see where the words are, the letters, the rhythm, the internal rhythm, the sounds. But yet we can't copy the blueprint of the Quran. This is a human impossibility. Because in human terms, if you have a human expression, whether art or language, you can emulate it. This is why some of Shakespeare's works has been attributed to Christopher Marlowe. So what do we do here? We know it can't come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So who's next? What's the other possible source? Not God, that's too much of a jump. Shaitan. Satan. I did this at the University of London once, and there was a Christian missionary in the background. He nicely stood up and said, yes, Mr. Tzortsis, but it could come from the devil. And I said to him, well, how do you know the devil exists? And then he thought for one. He said, because your Quran says so. So you believe in Quran, do you? So I give you another chance. He said, because the Bible. Well, now you have to prove to me the Bible. Because you're talking about an unseen entity. And for you to believe in it, you must have proof. And you're saying it's the Bible, then now the onus of proof is on you. So the best possible explanation after saying it can't come from an Arab, can't come from a non-Arab, can't come from the Prophet ﷺ, can't come from the devil, is that it came from Allah, mashallah, tabarakallah, it came from the divine. And this is quite a powerful argument. We have time to really speak about this with our friends, maybe relatives or the wider community. And I think it's more powerful than the scientific miracle. Because science can always change. But the classical Arabic has been preserved. You're not going to get another letter of the Arabic language. You're not going to get another grammatical rule. So it's timeless. It's a timeless miracle. But also we could talk about many other miracles in the Quran as well. For example, let's take history as an example. We know the Quran talks about history in a very profound way. It talks about history in a very deep way. It says, beware of your civilizational arrogance. You think you're a great civilization? Look at the civilizations before you. They became dust. Beware of your arrogance. But also the Quran mentions history in a way that really doesn't affect its message. It's so minute. If you were to take the sentence out of the Quran, it probably wouldn't make a big difference. But why is it there? The Quran mentions 2 different titles for the leader of the Egyptians. At the time of Musa alayhi salam, he's mentioned as Pharaoh. At the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, he's mentioned as Malik, king. Why the 2 different titles? The Bible always mentioned Pharaoh. The Torah always mentioned Pharaoh. All the historians of the time mentioned Pharaoh. So why is there such a difference? A minute difference.
Because the Syrian conquered Egypt. That's what they call their kings, the Malik.
That's fine. But how do we know? At that time, that knowledge wasn't there. The language of the Egyptians, the hieroglyphs at that time was a dead language. The hieroglyphs was revived in the 19th century, if not the beginning of the 20th century. Think about this. Think about this. And we know for it to be true. Because Pharaoh was started to mention in 14th century BC. In the new kingdom, the old middle kingdom, at the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, they called him king, Malik. But no one knew that at that time. We know it to be correct today because about 1300 years after, we learned to translate the hieroglyphs, the Egyptian language. But they never knew that at that time. So what's the best possible explanation? You can't claim now the Prophet ﷺ copied the Bible, because that means he knew what was right, left what was wrong, and took what was correct. And this is an impossibility. It's claiming that the Prophet ﷺ had a library of Alexandrian magnitude. Yeah? These guys are crazy, man. Do you see? So there's a historical miracle here. Also we have a scientific miracle. We know in Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse 12 to 15, the Quran mentions 8 meaningful points about the process of embryology. And we've just completed a research paper on this, updating the 1980s and 1990 argument that many of our ulama, many of our du'at have developed. And what's very interesting, and let's take a few words for example. Let's take the word nutfa. Allah mentions the word nutfa. Now this is an amazing word. According to Lisan al-Arab, the classical dictionary, and the Western academic dictionary, Lane's lexicon, nutfa has multi-layered meanings. It means a single entity from a greater group of its kind. For example, a single sperm amongst many sperm, or a female egg amongst many eggs in the ovaries. It also means a drop of fluid. It also means, according to the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a hadith, he says, a nutfa is from the male and from the female. Think about this. And also in Surah Al-Hajj, the Quran also mentions that the nutfa is a mixed substance. So what do we know today in modern embryology? This is the process of fertilization. Something that you can't see with the naked eye. The process of fertilization requires a single entity from the mother, a single entity from the father, a sperm and an ovum, and they're mixed together, just like what the Quran says. They're mixed together, and also they have to be contained in a fluid. And we know nutfa also means a drop of fluid. The sperm has to be contained in semen, and the ovum has to be contained in oviductal secretions. Sounds like a big word, but it's just fluid, yeah? Now how could the Prophet ﷺ guess this or known this? Some people claim he copied the Greek physicians, Aristotle, Galen, Hippocrates. But this is a fallacy, this is so wrong. Because Galen, he thought that only the sperm had all the genetic material. But according to the Sunnah, we know the genetic material comes from the male and the female. Because the Prophet questioned someone saying, how else do children resemble their mothers? Indicating the nutfa of the woman is also having a part to play in the genetic material of the human baby, the development of the human embryo. Also, Aristotle had a very bizarre view. He said that fertilization occurs with the sperm and menstrual fluid, blood, which is not a scientific view. And the Quran doesn't mention menstrual fluid, which is hayd in Arabic. It mentions nutfa. So if the Quran is so accurate in line with modern science, and it couldn't have copied the knowledge of the time, which is Aristotle and Galen, then where did it come from, people? This is why Sheikh Muhar Ali, rahimullah, he mentions something amazing. He says the Quran is not dependent on the 7th century with regards to science. It transcends time. And look what we see just by the use of the word nutfa. Amazing. Amazing. So what we've done, we could show that the Quran is from the divine, or we can't explain it naturally. It must come from the supernatural. And it proves the existence of the supernatural based upon the linguistic miracle, the historical miracle, and the scientific miracle. So brothers and sisters, let me summarize today's presentation. We started off by saying, let's talk about what does it mean to exist. The very important point that the Quran talks about as well. Because the Quran says, are you just going to follow your forefathers? Social pressure, your social context, even though they were based on falsehood? Who are you? What are you? Do we have any ultimate meaning, any ultimate value, any ultimate purpose? If there is no Allah, there is no divine accountability. We discuss, no, there is no ultimate value, meaning or purpose. We went then to the first argument, which Allah makes sense of the origins of the universe. And we said since the universe began to exist at a point in time, there's 3 possible explanations. As mentioned in the Quran, that it came from nothing, but we know out of nothing, nothing comes. It created itself. This is crazy. It's just like saying, can your mother give birth to herself? Or can you give birth to yourself? And the third option, the most rational option, is I had a creator or cause. The second argument was, the design of the universe is best explained not by chance, but by design. And we gave an example of the blackberry in the desert. Did it come to form together as a result of the oil in the sand? It formed plastic, and the sand melted away to form silicon and glass, and somehow you found your mother's mobile number inside? What's the best explanation? The improbability or design? And if we expand that example to the universe, and the universe is far more complex, with all the fine-tuning of the universe, therefore the best explanation is design. Then we spoke about the miracle of the Quran, that the Quran itself is a sign for Allah, is a sign for the supernatural, is a sign for Islam. And we spoke about the linguistic miracle. To reject the miracle is equivalent of rejecting that Greece exists or the world is round. And also we said that there's a historical miracle and a scientific miracle in the Quran. So these are some very basic points for us to understand that we have very good arguments for the atheist. Now brothers and sisters, just to end, the major response, because we've talked about who created God, who designed the designer. We gave answers to these questions. The major response from the atheists would be the problem of evil. The problem of evil. They say too much evil exists in the world. So how can Allah, who's supposed to be a good, merciful God, how can He exist? Now, as your homework, I want you to listen carefully. You got homework, guys. Everybody has homework. I want you to read the Quran in English. I want you to go to the 18th chapter and read the story about Musa alayhi salam and Khidr. Who knows the story? Okay, good. Revise that story. Learn about that story. Because that story beats the problem of evil. Because what does that story really teach us? It teaches us about the wisdom of Allah. It teaches us about the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the problem of evil, saying there's too much evil in the world, is actually not realizing who Allah is. Because they assume God is only good. But we have 99 names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that help explain reality, that help explain the world around us. And one of His names and attributes are the wise. So we know there's wisdom behind things, but then the atheist may say, but I can't see the wisdom. But that's arguing from ignorance. It's a fallacy. You can't argue from ignorance. The wisdom may exist, but you may not understand what that wisdom is. Also, we know that the problem of evil is actually not a problem for the Muslim, but a problem for the atheist, because we can explain it by saying life is not here to have a party. We're not here in life to have a playtime. We're here for a purpose, and our purpose is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also understand that the world, our very existence is not limited to the dunya. We're going to have the akhirah, where all justice is going to be settled. That people who deserve eternal bliss will get eternal bliss. Things will be settled on that day. Also, we have emotional, psychological responses to the problem of evil. For example, when a Muslim dies or gets drowned, according to the hadith, shaheed. When a baby dies, where do they go? Jannah, Muslim or non-Muslim. According to the atheist, they become worm meat. According to the Muslim, they go to Jannah. Think about this, people. If you die of stomach cancer or stomach problems, what happens to you? Shaheed. If you're buried by rubble, you die of? So the earthquakes themselves is actually a blessing. It's a test for us, but a blessing for the one who died. Oh, there's earthquakes. Oh, there's an earthquake in Pakistan. What happened to these people? According to the hadith, the shaheed. It's a test for us. You know why? Because how do we respond now? Do we condemn those people? Or do we see them as part of the ummah? Al-mu'minu miratu al-mu'min. The believer is a mirror of another believer. It's our test to help them now. Do you see the point here? And it's a test for the people who survive to realize, is this from their sin? Or is it a test from Allah? Do we come close to Allah as a result of this? Or move away from Allah? So we have so many good reasons to break down the problem of evil. It's not a problem at all. Because it just assumes God is just good and we're here to have a party. But rather we know God is the wise. And there's wisdom behind everything that He does. And this is more of an emotional argument because they don't know who Allah is. And it's our job to explain it to the people. So brothers and sisters, I'm going to end it there. We go through quite a few points. We've dealt with the problem of evil, talked about the argument from the beginning of the universe, the design of the universe, talked about the miracle of the Quran. So I think we should open up to question and answers. We have 10 minutes, I assume. Yeah? So subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Brothers and sisters, jazakallah khair. Forgive us for the lateness. May Allah bless you. And please take some of this home and really engage with the wider society to try and give them some da'wah. Because we know da'wah is an obligation from Allah. Allah has said, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbik." Call to the way of your Lord. Allah also says in the Quran, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمَرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And let there rise amongst you a group of people that will call to the good. Ibn Kathir in his tafsir, he said this means the whole of Islam comprehensively. They command the right, they forbid the wrong. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And they are the ones who will attain success. Al-Qurtubi in his tafsir said success here means Jannah. Put your hand up if you want to go Jannah. We'll give da'wah, guys, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum. I came all the way from UK, and this is a one-time opportunity, so let's use the time to ask questions, and I will moderate or make sure that brothers and sisters get enough chance. So I saw a hand there. Go ahead, brother. Yourself.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I'm asking you a question which people have been debating for the last few decades. My question is, they say science is based on facts.
Yes.
And the science also says that the evolution of humanity is starting from homogeneous, Homo sapiens, today human beings. And at one time we were apes. And Kitab says that we started from Adam and Eve. Can you please address that conflict?
Yeah. See, there's two issues here. First and foremost, when we talk about science, do we say that science is the only thing that gives us conclusions, answers about life? No. We have to understand what science is. If you speak to any philosopher of science, they would agree that it's ilm al-dhan. Ilm al-dhan is the ilm, is the knowledge of speculation. It's not qati, it's not definite. It's speculative because the methodology is like child's play. They just break things down to the most reducible component and they play around with variables and see does it work or not. It's a speculative methodology. Even the uncle's talking about the theory of evolution. That itself is based upon a speculative methodology. They don't even call it fact, by the way. If they do, they call it fact and theory. They say some things are fact. For example, we know we have DNA, we have shared DNA with things. We know, for example, the concept of mutation exists, but random mutation doesn't produce anything positive though. These things are fact in abstract reality, but the theory is the thing that tries to explain all those facts together. Now, if you remove the divine out of the picture, all you have is that theory, and it remains a theory, which is not testable and not provable, and also it does have some holes. For example, a major component of the theory of evolution is that you must have positive results from random mutation. Even to this day, I've met a guy who's doing a PhD thesis in Plymouth University in England. And they're just started now to try and test out, can you have positive random mutations? They can't find it still. Because when you have a mutation, it dies. It's a negative thing. And that component of evolution is necessary. Now, it doesn't mean they throw the whole of evolution in the bin. The reason they keep it, because it's the only explanation if the only method you're using is science. But that's baby stuff. Muslims, as a result, the Quran is teaching us to use empiricism, science. It teaches to use logic, reason, intuition, your heart. You have a whole range of things to use as tools to explain life, to explain reality. But unfortunately, we live in a world, we think science explains everything. It doesn't. It doesn't. This is baby stuff. Only, wallahi al-azim, speak to any academic scientist and say, why do you think science is going to explain everything? It's a very limited methodology to come to conclusions. For example, can you use science to deal with political problems? No. Can you use science to find out if a hadith is sahih or not? No, you need your aql, you need the historical process of the rationalization of history. For example, can you use science to tell you what is good and bad? You can't develop a moral theory from science. You can't develop one from science. You can't develop an ought from an is. You can't develop morality from science. Also, science can't even prove necessary truths like mathematics. Do you know that? In order for science to exist and to work, you need mathematics. Necessary truths, like 1 + 1 is 2. You can't prove that using science. How can you can't? You'll be arguing in a circle. You can't prove your emotions using science. Imagine going to your mother or your loved one or your wife and saying to her, Janu, Sonu, yeah, darling, Habibti, I love you. And then she replies, just using the speculative methodology of science, it's no different from a bar of chocolate, chemicals in your brain. Imagine she said that to you. You're like, what is this, man? Also, science can't even prove itself. It's called self-defeating. For example, science would say, science is the only way to form conclusions about life. But you can't prove that statement using science.
I understand you keep correcting me in science itself.
Exactly, it's speculative. So what do? Do we take ilmul dhan, the knowledge of speculation, or do we take ilmul qati, the knowledge of definite? So if we could prove the Quran is from Allah, and that gives us the ilm that is definite, and we know even the philosophers of science are telling us the basis of science is speculative, are you going to take that as a basis for true knowledge? No, don't get me wrong, we take science, we use it for medicine and the thing that is applied, the things that is true, the things that is used for. But are you going to use it for everything? So you have a weighing scale. And the reason I'm coming with this approach, because you don't have to be a scientist to understand why the Quran overrules the theory of evolution. Because if the basis for the Quran is qati, is definite, and you've proved for it to be from the divine, and we already know from consensus that science itself is applied to a certain realm of things, and science is ilmul dhan, science is the methodology of speculation, then what do you take? What's definite or what's speculative? It's simple, isn't it? You take what's definite. And this is how you should explain it to the scientists. I actually spoke to Richard Dawkins in Ireland at the Atheist Conference, and I said to him, you don't like discussing the philosophy of science. Because he said in the conference, don't discuss science, what it's about, just do science. And I said to him, why do you do that? And it's because they know that the foundations of science is speculative, it's very limited. Do you see? But the Muslim is more enlightened. We are more enlightened than scientists, brothers and sisters. Because not only do we use science, but we use logic, we use reason, we use intuition, we use our heart. We have a whole range of tools and processes and methods of thinking to form conclusions about life. Not just restricted to this method. And that's why it's very dangerous. Take Sam Harris, for example. He tried to develop a moral theory just by using science. And he said it's based on well-being. But his whole moral theory got utterly destroyed. Because well-being could mean harming others. Like pedophilia. They have well-being, it gives them well-being, but it harms others. Sadomasochism, it gives them well-being, but they harm others. So the way to disprove that theory is, if someone who has well-being could do something immoral, then your whole foundation for morality fails. So how can you base your foundation of morality based on a scientific view on well-being? So science could never give you morality, do you see? It's a longer discussion, but hopefully I've given you something to think about, inshallah. And after the prayer, I'll be available during dinner, and we can have informal discussions, inshallah ta'ala. And we could continue this on email, or whatever the case may be. Or if you're really interested, you could come tomorrow.
But Hamza, we are coming back after the prayer.
At the University of Minnesota.
Yeah, so after the prayer we'll come, we'll stay till 9 for the question answers, and then we will go for the food at 9 o'clock.
Khair, no worries, inshallah.
To give a fair chance, because you have come from a long way, and they, mashallah, this is a bigger crowd than usual. And we want to make sure everybody gets a fair
That's fine. I'm here.
And then Friday night there's another event. In case some of you are leaving, Friday night, Carson School of Management, Honeywell Auditorium.
Okay.
Hamza will be there as well, inshallah. We will give you more detail right after the prayer. That's great.
Just for the audience from Ummah TV, after prayer, we're gonna come back for question and answers, inshallah. Okay? Assalamu alaikum.
See you after 9 o'clock.
Yeah, this is a strange situation because a lot of these things stem from issues with the heart rather than issues of the mind. And I think sometimes the way to change someone's heart is obviously one, make dua to Allah, because Allah is the controller of hearts. Also do everything possible that you can to facilitate an environment that is conducive, that makes them more in line with the Islamic tradition, is in line with the beauty of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. To be honest, sometimes all that requires is you giving someone an understanding of who Allah is. Like, there's some really amazing books on the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just reflecting upon those, and you could relate them to reality. Ibn Qayyim, he had the view that the world, the dunya, creation, not the dunya, but creation itself, is a theater of divine attributes. So when you see beauty, you know because Allah is beautiful. And when you see mercy, because you know Allah is merciful. So these kind of things, if you link who Allah is with reality, it makes it real for people. And I think sometimes when people stick to this problem of evil argument, it's a shallow argument because it just assumes God is just good. But we know, as we mentioned in the presentation, that Allah is also wise and there's wisdom behind these things. That we're not here created just for a play, we're here created for a test. Also, we know that the akhirah will solve all these issues, and when people are in Jannah, they would forget even if they had any pain. And vice versa, when people are in Jahannam, they won't even remember if they had any pleasure. Yeah? So that's the reality of these realities in the hereafter. So I think the best thing to do is also just to show and make them reflect on issues like empathy. Where does empathy come from? How can we have feelings, and how can we share feelings with other human beings? What about the feeling of love, the feeling of beauty? These things are very objective for the human soul. They only make sense if God exists. Because if they're just a product of evolution, then they don't mean anything. They're meaningless. They're illusory. They don't have any true meaning because they're just a product of random processes, and they're a product of just our own need for survival. They don't have any objective grounding. But since we do love objectively, we do care objectively, we have fellow feeling for other human beings, it makes sense that Allah is a reality, not just a concept, but a reality. And I think, these people need to know who Allah is, because they have like a very Christianized version of who God is. He's like a man in the sky with a beard. Yeah? Talk about the transcendence of Allah. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like Allah. He is transcendent. He's ahad. He's uniquely one. He is al-wudud. He's the excessively loving. According to the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told his Sahaba that Allah loves us more than a mother loves their child. Now think about this. This is a transcendent type of love. It's not a human love, because the best love in the dunya is the love of a mother to her child. But Allah loves us more than that. Do you see? It's like the Prophet is giving an indication on trying to appreciate what al-wudud actually really means, the excessively loving. Talk about ar-Rahman, yeah? Talk about how, just a few months ago I was suffering from pneumonia and I couldn't breathe for 45 seconds. And during that process I thought, I would sacrifice my right arm and my right leg just to breathe again. Do you know that? We become arrogant. We become pugnacious, and out of our arrogance, to think that, we need more mercy. Even the breath itself. Just think about it. Put yourself in the situation that you can't breathe anymore. If you could do a sacrifice, I give you my leg, give my breath back. You give your leg easily, and here's an arm for extra. Yeah, that's what you do, isn't it? So we need to break things down. We've become so arrogant in our civilizational arrogance because we have flowing water and flowing gold now. Yeah, that black stuff called oil. Yeah, we have all these things that make us rich and powerful. We think we're self-sufficient. But when that goes, what happens? We become animals again. Do you see? So we forget about the mercy of Allah. We forget about, that we are totally reliant on Him. Yeah? And these small experiences allow us to realize that without Allah, we're really nothing anyway. So, I think these type of things would actually, soften our heart as well. And I think a lot of these issues stem from arrogance as well. And Allah in the Quran deals with arrogance in using different concepts. For example, Allah reminds us where we came from. That we were a despised fluid once. Yeah? We were a despised fluid. We were a baby. We couldn't even wipe our own backsides. We couldn't lift our own neck up. We needed help and support from others. We weren't self-sufficient. Also, Allah reminds us about death. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةَ الْمَوْتِ. Every soul is going to taste death. That's the reality. We're going to become one buffet one day. And we have this arrogance. So that's a way of dealing with it. But I would think if you portray some of the signs of Allah from your behavior as well, and really trying to connect with them, and show them who Allah is in the Islamic form. Because sometimes when we talk about God, we need to define God. Because when we talk about God, a Christian has his own background information, and he applies that background information to your conversation. So it's all muddled. You're saying God and he's saying God, but you mean two different things. Do you understand? That's sometimes the ambiguity of language. We need to define, what do we mean? And so express to the people, what do we mean by Allah? We mean that He's transcendent, He's not part of creation. We believe in He's uniquely one. We believe that He has 99 names and attributes, and we believe in the oneness of these and the uniqueness of these. So when you talk about Tawheed in a very special way, it really shows, wow, this is a very amazing conception of God. Unlike the Christianized version, which is like, He's 3 in 1, 1 in 3, 3 distinct persons, one essence, homoousios, as they say in Greek, is one essence but 3 distinct persons. You know, this kind of, some people say logically incoherent view on God. They also say that He's like a man in the sky, yeah? That kind of thing. We don't believe in that. We believe in the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also believe He's the excessively loving. We believe He's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. We believe He's the wise as well. So there's wisdom behind these things. So I think, there's not a quick, fast answer to these things, but I think one way of doing it is dealing with the arrogance issue, as we said, that how the Quran deals with, talking about who Allah really is, His 99 names and attributes, how they're they interplay with the whole universe, Ibn Qayyim, when he says about the 99 names and attributes, it's like they're like the divine theater in the creation. We see beauty because Allah is beautiful. We see love because Allah is loving. We see this because, it's like a interplay of His divine attributes. So if you talk about who Allah is, then I think that's one way of dealing with it, really. Because sometimes we have these assumptions. You say God and I say God, but we'll talk about two different things. Yeah? So inshallah, Wallahu a'lam, maybe that will help, inshallah.
While we wait for the next question, do remember that at Building Blocks website, the information about Friday event, as well as Brother Hamza's website will be mentioned. So that you can go to his website, you see he keeps Facebook very updated. He has a lot of articles on his website. So this is something which we can really benefit from. We are ready for a question from the brother's side. Brother Fuad.
My question is, right now the West is really trying to promote secular democracies in the Muslim areas. And what do you attribute the rise of atheism in the Western, because you are from UK, and in Europe we see this rise of atheism, and in the United States it's also happening. What do you attribute that to, basically?
I think there's two issues here. First, I think the rise of atheism is because of the failure of liberalism to deal with religion. I think liberalism in a European context has failed to deal with religious minorities. And the failure of liberalism to curtail the voice of religion has made these neo-atheists to come out and actually try to defend atheism. This is why the philosopher of politics, John Gray, he makes a very interesting point saying liberalism has failed to deal with the voice of the religious people. It hasn't kept them quiet enough. They're a bit loud. These Muslims, they've come to Europe, and there's an anti-Muslim wind blowing over Europe, and there's a pro-Muslim wind coming from the Muslim camp saying, we want our voices heard, we're special, that's what the people think. And then liberalism hasn't curtailed that, because liberalism says let people do what they want. And when religious minorities do what they want, the secularists and atheists, they don't like it. So that's why neo-atheism, that kind of militant atheism, post 9/11 has come about. That's a political issue. The other issue is because if you think about it, in order for secularism to thrive, it needs to show that it has an ideological dominance. It has to. Because what secular is the divorce of the church and state, essentially. Like God has no public say. You keep your religion at home, then we do what we want. Which is a bit absurd, because if your values come from your religion, are you saying you can't bring your values into the public sphere? Secularism is actually hegemony. It's actually oppression. Because you You could talk about your secular values in a secular society, but you can't talk about your religious values. But secularism is supposed to talk about, it's supposed to allow the public kind of conversation happening in the public square. But it doesn't allow the religious voice to come across. They say, oh, you have to talk about it in an abstract way. That you have to talk about good in a way that is non-religious. But for the Muslim, we cannot be secularized because what does good mean? It means what Allah wants, right? Ikhlas, do things for Allah's sake and it's in line with the Sharia. That's the good. If we can't speak about that in the public sphere, then it's no good. Yeah? Do you get the point? So it's the paradox of secularism. It's there to do with all conflicting minorities, but then it says these minorities can't voice themselves in the political sphere, which I think is quite bizarre. But yes, I think that's probably why, because secularism has to defend itself. Because if there's a rational argument for God's existence, and if God does exist, what's the implication here? You have to listen to what He said, and if He did say something and we could show it, then it's divine law now. That totally goes against the grain of secularism, do you see? And that's the point. But as Muslims, we should argue this in a positive way. Yeah? And we should, and also it's the fiqh of priorities as well. Sometimes it's probably unnecessary in certain contexts to even discuss this. The ulama are there to discuss. I don't know the community here, I don't know America well, so I can't pass a judgment. I'm not going to say that you have ulama here who are best placed to make that decision. But generally, this is why I think the new atheists have come across, because since the 1960s, especially in the academic field, the physicists, since the Big Bang cosmology came into play, the philosophers, a lot of them, we would even say 40% of them now, believe in a God. And that's upset a lot of people. So that's why they're coming out fighting strong.
Okay. Jazakallah khair, Brother Hamza. Question from Sister side. Sister Nala, go ahead.
How do you address the question, if God or if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all knowing, why do people have to be tested?
Okay, this is to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's foreknowledge. And what I mean by foreknowledge, not that He's waiting for something to happen and He knows it. Rather, we know Allah's knowledge is eternal and infinite. You see, the best way to make this example, say my son wakes up every morning and he plays with his dinosaurs. Right? I know this. Does my knowledge of him waking up playing with his dinosaurs actually make him play with his dinosaurs? No, it's because he likes dinosaurs. So my foreknowledge of my son Zakaria playing with dinosaurs doesn't make him play with dinosaurs. For example, if I know the brother at the back, if he's going to go to the gym and he's going to bench 235 pounds, I know he's going to do that because I've checked his DNA, I've checked his historical records, I have foreknowledge that he's going to do that. Does my knowledge of that fact make him do it? No, it's because he's strong. He's a beast, as you guys say. Yeah, he could bench, and that's his nature. So to deal with that issue of foreknowledge doesn't mean God has made you do this. However, in our aqidah, we do believe that Allah has created our actions. But it's a longer discussion on how to reconcile that. But I think, just to limit to the question itself, knowing about something doesn't necessitate He's made you do it. Do you see? I don't know if that helps, sister. Does that help? That's fine. Would you want anything clarified?
We have our own. God gave us a brain to think.
Yeah.
And let us choose whichever.
Yeah, we have.
Whichever way
Yeah.
we want to take.
Yeah, but the question was specific about foreknowledge. But the thing is, on a bigger scale, we have free choice within the absolute will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think that's the best way to summarize it. We have free choice within the absolute will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it doesn't mean we have free will necessarily. But we have free choice. We have choices, and we make those choices. And we know that from reality. Like I pick this up, I know I've intended to make a choice to pick up this thing. But we know our action is created by Allah. Do you see? Our actions are created by Allah, but we have the free choice within the capacity that Allah has given us to do an action. And that's how you reconcile between the fact that Allah created our actions and that He's all just. And this is how, generally Aqidah of Ahlul Sunnah have reconciled this issue. Yeah? That Allah is the most just, so He's not going to test us for no reason, yeah, and oppress us. But also Allah created our actions. So we don't deny that He did create our actions, right? So, I know I have a choice to pick this up and move it. Yeah? That's my free choice within the absolute will of Allah, because Allah has created my action of the ability to do this in the first place. He created the bowl, the plastic, me. Do you see the point? So that's how you reconcile 2 points. But I think what we have to do as well is not fall for the trap that the Greek philosophers did. They tried to jump into, inverted commas, the mind of God. Why does He do this? How does He think that way? That question itself is irrational. It's like, for example, a mouse trying to think like a cat. How can a mouse think like a cat? It's just 2 different paradigms, yeah? Like, how could the limited mind think like Allah? It's impossible. It's just, you see, these questions, the question itself becomes irrational. So what we do, we know Allah exists. He's created our actions. He says we have free choice. And we have a heaven or hell. And these have been destined for us. We don't know what they are. So what does Allah say? Aina tadhhabun? Where are you going? So work on our actions so we could go where we should be going. And then that's it. Make it very internal. These whole concepts are supposed to drive us to do good deeds, to come close to Allah, and achieve what we want to achieve, which is ultimate bliss, which is Jannah. Which we know has been predestined, but we don't know what it is. But because of who Allah is, He will know the future. He has predestined everything. But that's a different paradigm. What's our sphere of control? Allah has told us we have free choice from His absolute will, and that we will be accountable in a just way. So from a personal view, that's all we need to think about, really. Does that make more sense?
So plus we have Sheikh Hatim here, who mashallah is our scholar in town. So Sheikh Hatim, would you like to make any comment on this question?
No, I would like first, I may come back to the question, but I would like first to thank Brother Hamza for the presentation. It was very beautiful, mashallah, and had the right mix between the use of facts and being motivational at the same time.
It's okay.
Getting closer to the picture, to see the details, and farther away to grasp the whole picture, as well as the right mix of using logic and having the necessary respect for the sunnah and the authentic text. And just when he answered Brother Mahmoud about the issue of Darwinism or evolution, I'm quite sure that he did not mean to say that, but the answer may have inferred to people that we don't have that much regard for science because it is founded on speculation. In fact, the Muslim scholars throughout the centuries have so much regard for science that the 4 things that a Muslim may not contest at all, according to scholars of the caliber of Ibn Hazm, Ghazali, and Ibn Taymiyyah, would include 2 religious things, such as the authentic clear text and the confirmed consensus, and 2 others that are Bada'i al-Aqli, or mental axioms, Awa'il al-Hiss, things perceptible by the senses. Science is not one thing. There are scientific facts, scientific theories, and scientific conjecture. Part of science is certain, and part of science is speculative. Also, part of the revelation is certain, and part of the revelation is speculative. So the issue is not that the whole revelation is certain and the whole science is speculative. We have to break it down. We have to see when is science speculative and when is it certain. Otherwise, when we talk to the Christians and they tell us 1 + 1 + 1 = 1, we tell them that this is it's impossible. So we also use science to say that there are scientific miracles in the Quran. So the very science of embryology that we use, we can't use it in our favor, and then if it poses a problem for us, we then, pull out the speculative card, and we have to be really true to one standard, which is that, is this certain science or not? When I say that the revelation is speculative sometimes, that applies in transmission, applies to the hadith in transmission, does not apply to the Quran in transmission, just the hadith. But in understanding and implication, it applies to the Quran and the Sunnah. Some of the Quran is speculative in meaning and implication, and some is decisive in meaning and implication. For instance, if embryology tells us that the embryogenesis is rather complete in the first 40 days, and it is not, as most of our scholars may have understood it, to be 120, we can say, well, forget about embryology now. Well, this is the very embryology that we were using to say that there are scientific miracles of the Quran. So we would have to look at which one is speculative and which one is certain. And when the scholars went back and looked at the various reports of this hadith, upon which the scholars founded this understanding of 120 days, they found that there are reports in Muslim from Hudayfa that quite clearly say 40 instead of the 120. Even the very hadith of Abdullah bin Mas'ud has variations in Bukhari and Muslim, and the Muslim report, which Muslim used to give more attention to exactness of wording. The variation of Muslims makes it 40 and not 120. So just that this is clear. Science, part of it is speculative, part of it is certain, and exact sciences, natural sciences, and humanities. They are all, you can always address them from a scientific angle. It is all the deductive method, but it is inductive in exact sciences, and it is empirical in natural sciences, yet still in math and exact sciences, the inductive method itself is a scientific method, and the empirical one has been introduced by the Muslim scholars to the world in natural sciences. The last thing I want to mention that the issue of predestination may be a nicer parable would be the fetus. Not the fetus, but a child. If you have a child, or Allah gives you a child, there is so much that you have done to get that child, to have that child. So if you say I'm not responsible for that child, because that is the creation of Allah, yes, it is the creation of Allah, yet the whole world will call you crazy. If you're the parents, and then you put the child in front of garbage can and say, Allah created him, Allah takes care of him, I'm not responsible for him because it's Allah's creation. The same applies to your actions. Just like your child, your action has been created by Allah, yet you are quite responsible for it, and you can't deny that you have free choice to get married, free choice to have a child, and so on, and free choice also to take the steps or towards that action that you finally committed. So that's it. Thank you very, very much for a great presentation.
We will have to stop because it is 9:15, and we need to go downstairs. We need to eat. Brothers will get more of a chance to sit with Brother Hamza. Sheikh Adam, you have something?
No, but paleontology proved that Darwinism is wrong because the fossil record, this is complete science now, the fossil record should have shown the links, have there been gradual evolution. And when the paleontologists proved that Darwinism is incorrect because the fossil record did not show the links, the links between one species and another, then the neo-Darwinists came up with the idea of genetic mutations. The neo-Darwinists, concocted the idea of genetic mutations because the fossil record actually jumps. There's something called the Cambrian explosion, where you all of a sudden find a new species in the fossil record, which is completely opposed to the idea of gradual evolution, like Darwin said, a bear acquiring a more aquatic environment and having like a longer whatever, and then becoming a whale. So that paleontologists proved that to be completely incorrect. So fighting for their life, the neo-Darwinists said evolution happens through mutations. That's why you see the sudden appearance of species, which is also a complete defiance to science, because as Brother Hamza said, mutations never bring about more genetic information to the table, whether it's deletions, chromosomal deletions, aggregations, and so on. They bring about disease and infirmity. They don't bring about more genetic information to the table. So that is scientifically proven wrong. It is more of a philosophical argument than actual scientific argument.
And the cat